exemption over plants that produce pesticides. That's because the EPA is concerned about pesticides in general. But they're not given the authority of the entire plant and all the things that can go wrong, just the pesticidal protein that's produced in the plant. And so they give an okay to BT, corn, and cotton. There was a potato on the market that's been removed. And they just basically said, since BT is safe,
that's outrageous.
Yeah, and they don't even require a significant amount of testing to prove it. And I testified at an EPA hearing and explained that because of this jerry-rigged regulatory framework, they have been basically going with wrong assumptions, not taking into consideration even published science by government scientists, showing that BT is toxic and allergenic, showing that basically most of their assumptions about the safety of BT was just simply that, assumptions and not scientific and already disproved in most cases.
What was the response to that?
Well, they didn't respond verbally. It was just a chance to hear, people responding in a committee meeting. But we haven't seen anything from the EPA which leads us to believe that they have gotten the science. They simply, in one case, they have specific criteria for approving BT, but when it turns out that the BT didn't even meet that criteria, when they re-registered it, they ignored all those science, never even discussed it, and just re-registered it for another 7 years.
What does that mean to you?
Well, it means that we have a corporatocracy in place where it's hard to see where the government ends and the biotech industry begins. In the case of bovine growth hormone, it was very obvious. Michael Taylor was in charge of policy at the FDA. Margaret Miller had done research at Monsanto on RBGH. Then she became branch chief at a division that evaluated her own research. Susan Setchen was a contractor for Monsanto working on RBGH. She became the lead reviewer of RBGH, that's recombinant bovine growth hormone. Richard Burroughs, who was an independent veterinarian working at the FDA, said that the review process was completely inadequate. He was fired from his job so that they would push RBGH quicker through the system. That, by the way, RBGH is an animal drug, and so that does require a review. It's not like the food, which doesn't require a review, but the review was completely ridiculous. In fact, the Canadian government scientists did an analysis of the U.S. FDA's evaluation of bovine growth hormone and said it was basically ridiculous. It was they just assumed that everything that was told to them by the industry was true. They didn't look at key questions that were about human safety, and they ignored some of the evidence that showed problems in the animals that were exposed to the drug. So it shows me that the current regulatory authorities are not to be trusted when it comes to evaluating the safety of GMOs. And of course, we can look at drugs and find similar patterns, but my focus is GMOs. And that's why we recommend that people take it in their own hands. In fact, it's not just us. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine last year came out with a policy paper urging all physicians to prescribe non-GMO diets to everyone. They said the animal feeding studies show a causal relationship with disorders, and that some of those disorders include reproductive problems, accelerated aging, organ damage, gastrointestinal problems, etc.
Do you think that that's why also a lot of animals in people's homes are sick from the food that they're eating? Are they using GMO in animal feed for pets?
Absolutely. In fact, the pets get the byproducts of the U.S. of the industrial human food supply. And so they actually move in parallel. I talked to one veterinarian who has many, many people who follow him as a syndicated columnist, and he said when GM products were introduced in 1996, a lot of cats and dogs started to get allergies. And when he recommends to the owners to switch their animals to organic feed, the allergies typically go away.
Now, a lot of people are going to be concerned who either A, can't afford to go to Whole Foods or do go to Trader Joe's. There's a new market called Sprouts that's up, and I actually called them on the phone and asked if they carry GMO fruits and vegetables, and they said no, but I like things in writing. I like commitments from companies. The other thing is, what about local farmers in the U.S.? Can we trust that the local farmers, or do we have to go there, or do we have to talk to them to eat their food, or what's the suggestion?
Well, again, if you're going with produce from local farmers, you only have to be concerned about 4 products at current. Now, the biotech industry wants to introduce many more products, but today, for produce, you have zucchini, crookneck squash, corn on the cob, and you have papaya from Hawaii. So as far as papaya from Hawaii goes, because it cross-pollinates on the tree, even if you have an organic tree, if it's cross-pollinated, the fruit that the tree produces, the flesh is non-GMO, but the seeds are GMO. So some unwitting organic farmers have actually taken the seeds out of particularly delicious papaya and planted them for their new plantation, and it turns out they have 100% GM papaya growing in their organic farm.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but how the heck is that possible?
You mean from a
Yeah,
biological
to take
standpoint?
how does that happen? Because that means you can never get rid of these things.
Well, there's a lot of reasons why we can never completely get rid of them. I mean, if you think about this self-propagating genetic contamination, the genes that have been released already in our ecosystem can outlast the effects of global warming and nuclear waste. It just goes on and on. It just reproduces. It crosses with non-GM members of the same species, with wild relatives of other species. Canola, for example, is related to wild mustard and all these other things. It could actually cross with broccoli and cabbage. The sugar beets that are planted for sugar can also cross with table beets and chard. So we have a situation where we have a runaway contamination and pollution of our gene pool. Now, we can certainly reduce the exposure dramatically by getting rid of it out of the marketplace, but we don't have the technology to fully clean it up today.
When you have a multinational company with the kind of power and governmental empowerment that Monsanto has, and they already they're declaring they want to own the entire food supply by a certain date, don't you think that sociopathic disconnect, when it's empowered, is dangerous for the whole planet?
In an unprecedented way, Kim, in an unprecedented way. We've never, ever deployed a technology like GMOs, where we feed the products of an infant science to the entire population and release the crops into the environment where they can never be recalled. Furthermore, we talked about reducing biodiversity. Monsanto wants to introduce Terminator technology, which will make sterile seeds. And the reason why Terminator technology was developed, according to the developers, was to target the 1.4 billion farmers in the world that save seeds. And by saving seeds, it means that they end up growing seeds that work best in their own climate and geography. So we have millions and millions of types of seeds on the earth that have this diversity, which provide us the security, especially in times of climate change. Because when there's changed climates or there's new diseases, it's the diversity where we can find the plants that can survive in the changed conditions. But companies like Monsanto, and they're the largest seed company in the world, they want to change all that. They want to divert all of the purchasing and all the farmers to purchase only the seeds from their catalogs, which is obviously going to be
a monopoly. It's a global monopoly.
And it'll wipe out the diversity, which is the basis of our security. So they're willing to bet on the lives of billions of people in order to promote their bottom line.
What about baby food?
Unfortunately, baby food is also subject to GMOs. You have the soy infant formula, which if it doesn't say non-GMO, you can assume it's GMO, which is obviously horrific. Children are most at risk to the potential dangers of GMOs, particularly those who are very young. Even nursing infants can pick up allergens from the milk of their mothers. Children under 2 years old are much more likely to get allergies. The kids don't have a developed blood-brain barrier or a barrier between their digestive system and their blood, and so what they take in could have a more systemic impact on their whole health. In addition, you have a situation where they take the food and turn it into their own organs, whereas once you're older, you mostly use food as energy. And so if there's nutrient problems, it'll show up more in the structure and shape and function of their organs and systems. That's why for nutritional research, they typically use younger animals, and that's also why Monsanto often uses older animals when it tries to demonstrate that the GM foods are safe. So right now we have a situation where we have an epidemic of childhood diseases and disorders. Autism is just skyrocketed. Food allergies have skyrocketed. And many of there's an abrupt change and increase in many of these statistics starting around 1996,